Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, the Senate what's before us right now is Senate Bill 1. And for those who are here today watching or at home or will watch this later and are wondering what is it that the Senate is doing other than coming down here and giving speeches, what we're trying to do is we're trying to start debate on a bill, on Senate Bill number 1. And Senate Bill number 1 is the Senate's effort to respond specifically, not just to general events that are happening in the Middle East, but in particular the decision made a few weeks ago that the United States would be leaving Syria and our presence there. And at the time when that decision was made, I told everybody I thought it was a bad idea. A lot of people agreed, and there's a lot of reasons why it is a bad idea. Although I do think it's important anytime we ask the American people to send their young men or women abroad. In the case of Syria, it's about 2,000 special operators working alongside tens of thousands of Kurdish and Syrian democracy forces. Democratic forces. Anytime we spend money or send Americans abroad and risk their lives, the American people deserve for us to go to them and justify why it is we should do it or continue doing it. And that's certainly the case with Syria. So I don't agree with the decision, but I do think it's given the Senate an opportunity, and those of us who disagree with that decision, an opportunity to go out and tell people why it is that it's important. And that's a broader topic, and I'll be having more to say about that in the days to come. But one of the reasons why it is important is because the U.S. withdrawal from Syria will have a dramatic impact on the security of Israel. Now, again, any time that we ask the American people to support another country with money or diplomatic support or anything it might be, or weapons, we should justify, we should never take it for granted why it is that it's important that we support that other country. In the case of Israel, support for Israel at a time when very few things enjoy bipartisan support, support for Israel has wide bipartisan support here in Congress and across the country, and rightfully so. Our support of the state of Israel is founded both on morality and on our national interests. On the issue of morality, let me say the state of Israel is very unique. It was founded for a very specific purpose. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, in which millions of Jews lost their lives, it was vowed that never again would the Jewish people not have a place to go and seek refuge or live in peace and security. And the state of Israel was established to be that homeland for the Jewish people. So it's unique in the fact that it was given its birth by an international organism, unique in the world in that regard. The second reason why we should support Israel is because it's in our national interest. Israel is everything we wish more countries in the Middle East and around the world were. They are a pro-American, free enterprise democracy. And I ask you only for a moment to imagine what the world would be like, how much easier our foreign policy would be if there were more countries in that part of the world that were pro-American, free enterprise democracies. But we have one, the Jewish state of Israel, and that's why we should support it. From its very birth, Israel has faced threats to its very existence. But I would say that today, the threats it faces are the gravest ones it has had to confront in almost half a century. The impetus for much of that threat comes from one place, and that is Iran, a country who almost as a matter of course, its government chants death to America and death to Israel on a regular basis. It is one of the stated purposes of that government to destroy the state of Israel. But they aren't just words, they are actions. I have here a map of Iran and, of course, Israel. First, notice Israel is this tiny yellow area on this map. At its narrowest point, Israel is 9 miles wide. So this is not a large country in terms of mass size. It's unreal how much of the world's attention, both at international organisms and international debates, focus in on this one tiny country. But there it is, that very small nation that you see right there in yellow. And there's Iran, clearly larger and in terms of on the map and in reality. But Iran isn't simply a rhetorical enemy of Israel. It is taking action to encircle Israel and to threaten its security. It begins with its engagement in its missile program. Iran is developing and has developed ballistic missiles with a range that reach every part of Israel. Basically, here's the bottom line. Iran can launch ballistic missiles that reach any city in Israel. right now, which is why their nuclear ambitions are so dangerous. Imagine if at some point in the future Iran is able to attach a nuclear warhead to one of those ballistic missiles, a country that on a regular basis its leaders chant death to Israel with a nuclear weapon that can reach Israel. Well, that's a proposition no one wants to see come about. That's why the Iranian ambition to have nuclear weapons is so dangerous. But they already possess that, as it is today. But they don't simply directly target Israel. They also, I believe, directly, but they hide behind surrogates in the region who do their bidding. These surrogates have, for many, many years, been found in southern Lebanon among Hezbollah. We're going to talk about them in a moment. They are a surrogate that basically works at the behest of the Iranian government. And there have been conflicts, in fact, wars between Israel and Hezbollah, in which there have been massive military attacks coming from Lebanon, rocket strikes into Israel and Israel's response, the last one in about 2005, 2006 time period. And it could happen again. In fact, I believe the conditions are ripe for it to happen again, and it could happen at any moment for a variety of different reasons that would have to be part of another speech because time doesn't permit. Suffice it to say, incredibly dangerous proposition. How does Hezbollah get this weaponry? They get this weaponry from Iran, and it is shipped through Syria. Through Syria. The U.S. disengagement from Syria will make it easier for Iran and the IRGC, which belongs from the Iranian government, and Hezbollah to bring in those weapons into southern Lebanon to strike at Israel at some point in the future. In addition to that, Iran is also present on the ground in Syria, which, as you see, borders Israel. So not only does Iran help Hezbollah, but Hezbollah and Iran are in Syria, on Israel's very border, in the same region in the south. And a U.S. withdrawal will make it easier for Iran to grow their presence there. So now Israel faces a threat from Hezbollah, from southern Lebanon, a threat from Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. We also see that the Iranian influence has grown in Iraq. The second leading party, political movement, in the current Iraqi parliament is a Shia group, directly aligned with Iran, with growing political influence. They want to kick America out of there, and believe me, they want to turn Iraq into another base of operation in which Israel can be targeted. Down here in Yemen, the Houthis are an agent of Iran. And you may say, well, that's kind of far. Well, it isn't, in the sense that those missiles and rockets could reach there as well, but it also allows them the opportunity to shut off transit here at this choke point on the bottom of the Red Sea, which could directly impact, ultimately, the ability of trade and commerce for Israel and for the region writ large. Obviously, we can see a growing Iranian presence in Bahrain and in Kuwait. Suffice it to say that Iran is carrying out an effort to grow its influence and encircle who it views as its enemies, the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia, but more than anyone else, the Israelis. This is not the only threat, by the way, that Israel faces. It also faces growing violence and resistance in the Judea and Samaria region, often called by some the West Bank, but also down here from Gaza, where there's been upticks in violence. I failed to mention that in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah routinely builds tunnels from Lebanon into Israel. The purpose of that is to be able to sneak fighters in through those tunnels right into Israel so they can conduct commando raids and kill civilians, not military personnel, civilians. The threats are growing every single day facing Israel. I want to talk specifically for a moment about the missile threat to Israel. Here are the ranges of these rockets. These are the rockets, because there was a Israel-Hezbollah war. The next one will be far deadlier. And it'll be far deadlier for a couple of reasons. The first is Hezbollah can now build these rockets. They no longer need to ship them all in. Over the last decade and a half, they have built the capability to construct these rockets themselves. The second is they have more of them. And that matters because Israel has a very good missile defense system. But you can overwhelm a missile defense system with volume, meaning you launch 100 rockets and you knock down 99 of them, but one of them gets through and hits a population center and kills 10,000 people. Hezbollah now has that capability. These rockets are also precision guided. They're not just lobbing them over and it hits what it hits. They can now launch precision guided munitions to target specific areas within Israel. And the ranges of these rockets that they now possess are stunning. As an example, if you look at this little ring here, it tells you how many seconds it would take from launch to impact, meaning 10 to 25 seconds before they could hit, for example, the area of Nazareth and Tiberias. Moving further down, you see 35 in Netanya to 50 seconds. Further down, around Tel Aviv, 75 seconds. Jerusalem, just south of that, is probably another 10 seconds added, 85 seconds, 120 seconds, 165 seconds. So imagine for a moment if you are visiting Israel or live in Israel or a student studying there, whatever it might be, and one of these launches come in, a barrage of 1,000 rockets launched. You literally have 35 to 50 seconds, less than 2 minutes. There is no country in the world that can mobilize people to get out of the way in 2 minutes. And these are their population centers. And this is the threat that faces them right now, and that's just from Lebanon. Imagine that same capability I just described also existing in Syria. And imagine it all being launched simultaneously from Syria, from Lebanon, and from Iran. And now you begin to see the constructs of a plan to destroy this tiny nation and why it is so critical that the United States support them in fighting for their existence. The threat is extraordinary. The second thing you talk about all this, there's one more element to it. There is now a global effort, it's called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction, BDS, that is designed to wage economic war on Israel. In essence, to pressure companies to boycott Israeli companies and people who do business in Israel until they stop, to pressure investment funds and banks to no longer do investments on anything related to Israel, and to pressure governments around the world to sanction Israel. That's what this effort is about. It is to undermine them economically as well, to destroy them. It's economic warfare. And it's being waged at every level, and it's working. People are adopting this around the world, and there are some that advocate for it here. We've recently seen in the news a number of companies that have decided not to do business in certain parts of Israel because of the pressure from that movement. And by the way, I would point out that they're not just boycotting the economy. There are people that they don't do concerts. They won't play the Israeli sports teams. They want the Israeli government kicked out of the International Committee for different sports, including soccer and the Olympic Committee. They boycott cultural events. They boycott universities. They're pressuring universities to cut ties with any university in Israel over all this. It is an effort to destroy Israel culturally, economically, in a way that works in combination with the effort to destroy it physically. It's a very real threat. And so we have tried to confront both of these issues in bipartisan legislation. I have up here a chart, and I'll talk about it in a moment, because 26 states in this country have tried to do something to condemn BDS. But I'll get to that in a moment before I tell you the what. I've just told you why it is it's so important that we stand with Israel and the threats that Israel faces. Now I want to describe to you what this bill does. This bill has 4 components to it. One deals with a human rights violation in Syria. We'll discuss that further, perhaps tomorrow. The second component of this bill deals with Jordan, which is one of the neighbors that Israel has that is actually critical to its security. One of the best things that happened to Israel's security was the deal with Jordan and Egypt that allowed them at their periphery to have countries that at least recognized them and were not out to destroy them. But Jordan faces its own threats from some of the same actors, by the way, and add to that ISIS. But the other 2 elements is we took these 2 bills that had bipartisan support, co-sponsored by Republicans and Democrats. We combined them with the other 2 bills that also had such support into one bill, and that is Senate Bill 1. And we viewed it as an opportunity for the United States Senate and for Congress to weigh in on foreign policy at a time when we believe that all of these threats that I've just described to Israel are made worse by the decision to withdraw from Syria. And that is the bill that's before us. Today I want to talk about the 2 components that impact Israel directly. The first is basically the United States-Israel Security Assistance Authorization Act, fancy title for a bill that I co-authored with my very good friend, another strong supporter of Israel, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, who sits on the other side of the aisle. But again, I told you this is a bipartisan issue. This bill has 72 co-sponsors here in the United States Senate, 72. It passed overwhelmingly by a voice vote. We didn't even have to have a roll call vote. It was just voice voted out, meaning unanimous consent. No one objected on the 1st of August of last year. It passed in the House with an amendment on September 12th, and then it was hotline for a potential voice vote here on October 11th, 2018. What does this bill do? The first thing it does is it lays out a statement of policy. And let me tell you why that's important. People say, statement of policy, words, why do they matter? They matter in the region because one of the things that would encourage Hezbollah or any of Israel's enemies to perhaps attack it is the belief that the United States is no longer as committed to Israel's security as we once were. They could miscalculate. They read these headlines about, one or two people in America saying something negative towards Israel, and they think that somehow we're weakening in our resolve. I know that sounds silly to us, but to people involved in that over there, it's not. They read into this and they miscalculate. They make errors. But a miscalculation here could lead to an all-out war that could cost the lives of thousands and thousands of people and could potentially lead to the destruction of Israel, along with other nations in the process. And so it's important for us to make very clear that our commitment to Israel is unwavering. It is especially important in light of the decision to withdraw from Syria, because what a lot of these countries, including Iran, are reading into this is the United States' commitment to the Middle East is no longer very strong. And not only are they not committed to being involved in the region, they're actually withdrawing any of the assets that they could be using to be supportive of their allies in the region. So these statements of policy are important. And what we put in this bill lays out a statement of policy, and it says, quote, "It shall be the policy of the United States to provide assistance to the government of Israel in order to support funding for cooperative programs to develop, produce, and procure missile, rocket, projectile, and other defense capabilities to help Israel meet its security needs and to help develop and enhance United States defense capabilities," end quote. What that means is this is a cooperation. Israel may be developing some of these technologies because they have an immediate need. We benefit from that technology too. If Israel develops the next generation of missile defense systems, we would use that as well in the case that we were threatened by it. That's that statement of policy. The bill also authorizes U.S. security assistance and foreign military financing at no less than $3.3 billion a year for the next decade. That, by the way, is simply the language from a memorandum of understanding that was signed by the Obama administration and Israel. We put that into statute. We authorize it. This is really important. It extends a war reserve stockpile authority and extends loan guarantees to Israel through 2023. Israel has never defaulted on U.S.-backed loan guarantees, and this program helps provide rainy day insurance on Israel's stability, given the many threats that it's facing. It authorizes the president to transfer precision-guided munitions and related defense articles and services to reserve stocks for Israel as necessary for legitimate self-defense. What that means is that these weaponry wouldn't be sent, but they would be put on reserve status, assuming it doesn't impact our readiness, and they would be made available to Israel in case a war broke out and their reserves were quickly depleted. They start running out of rockets and munitions and defense apparatus, and the United States has set aside weaponry that we are ready to rapidly send to them so they can defend themselves. They pay for this. But at least they know it's sitting there. We don't have to scramble to find it. It takes 2 weeks to get there, and by then the war is over. It has other requirements, but it expresses the sense of Congress that the president should provide to us procedures for rapidly acquiring and deploying what we need to support production of these precision-guided munitions for our U.S. counterterror mission. It requires the president to report no later than 120 days to the appropriate committees on Israel's eligibility for strategic trade authorization. Strategic trade authorization exception to certain export control licensing, including the reasons as to why Israel has not yet been included in the list of countries eligible for the strategic trade authorization exception. It authorizes the president, this one's also very critical, this is a new threat that's emerging. It authorizes the president to enter, again, into a cooperative agreement, meaning it benefits them and us, to develop counter unmanned aerial vehicles and the threat they pose. And the reason why that is because on February 10th of last year, an Iranian drone was shot down by Israel. And everyone has every reason to believe that these unmanned aerial vehicles are the next threat that will be deployed both in the battlefield and potentially by terrorists. And we would work with Israel, who faces an immediate threat, to develop counters to that. Today, we don't have good counters to that. Above all else, it makes one more very clear policy statement, which has been a linchpin of our support for Israel. And that is that it is the policy of the United States to ensure that Israel maintains its ability to counter and defeat any credible conventional military or emerging threat from any state or possible coalition of states or from non-state actors while sustaining minimal damages and casualties through the use of superior military means possessed in sufficient quantity, including weapons, command, control, communication, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities that in their technical characteristics are superior in capability to those of such other individual or possible coalition states or non-state actors. Here's what this means: that it is the policy of the United States to ensure that Israel's weapons and systems are better than anyone else's in the region. Whatever everybody else has, we will sell them and allow them to access and acquire something better, so that they always have an advantage. Because if anyone in that region believes it could beat Israel in a war, they will try to beat Israel in a war. That was the history from its very birth. That was the history, and that's the lesson of 1967 and 1973. We do not want that to happen again. That's what this bill does. That's why it had so much support. That's why it's so important for us to move to debate on this issue. But it also tackles this economic warfare. What's included in this is a bill we filed last year with Senator Manchin called the Combating BDS Act. By the way, last year, the banking chairman, Senator Crapo of Idaho, and the ranking member, Senator Brown of Ohio, they discharged this bill from their committee. They didn't even require a hearing. And they did it late last year after running it by all their members. And we tried to pass it in the Senate by voice vote, and were unable to because of one senator who blocked it. And let me just start by thanking Senators Crapo and Brown for working hard to advance this bill last year, as well as for co-authoring with me the new Hezbollah sanctions law last year, known as the Hezbollah International Financing Prevention Amendments of 2018. We strengthened sanctions on Hezbollah we had passed 2 years previous. So what it does is it basically says that any state or city in America, first of all, let me tell you what it doesn't do. It doesn't outlaw BDS. If you're an American company and you want to boycott or divest from Israel, it doesn't make it illegal. It doesn't stop you from doing it. The only thing it says is there some city or county or state in this country who wants to support Israel? They have a right to say, we are not going to buy services or goods from any company that's boycotting or divesting from Israel. That's all it does. It gives cities and counties like these 26 states the opportunity to have their elected officials who respond to the people of those states or cities or counties that elected them to make a decision that they're not going to do business with people who don't do business with Israel and boycott Israel. In essence, it allows us to boycott the boycotters. Now, some say that's an infringement on the First Amendment. First, I would tell you the First Amendment protects speech and actions that function in the form of speech. This is not an effort to silence speech, nor is this an effort, by the way, to defeat an effort per se. It is an effort to defend the right to counterspeak. First Amendment's a two-way street. You have a right to express your views on something, but others have a right to respond. You have a right to boycott a country, and people have a right to boycott you. And that's what this law allows them to do. It's that simple. By the way, this is not some domestic debate. This is about, they're not trying to influence some law that we're passing here in BDS. They're not trying to influence your opinions on a topic. They're trying to influence the foreign policy of another country. This is not traditional free speech. The courts have weighed in on this in the past, and the courts have given Congress and the executive branch extraordinary discretion on the setting of foreign policy. And when a company weighs in on BDS, they're not trying to influence a domestic debate or a topic of opinion here in the United States political system. They are trying to punish a nation state so that that state changes its policies in another country. There's an open question about whether the First Amendment even covers that. But the bill basically says, notwithstanding whatever's in the bill, nothing in the bill shall be construed to invade or to hurt anyone's First Amendment rights. So anyone who hides behind the idea that this is designed to silence speech isn't being truthful. This doesn't outlaw BDS. You want to boycott or divest from Israel? You can. It's legal. We're not outlawing that. That would be an infringement. All we're saying is, if you're going to boycott Israel, those who support Israel have a right to boycott you. And that includes cities and counties and states who don't want to buy stuff from you. That's what this bill does. That's why it enjoys this broad bipartisan support. Some have asked me to take it out of this bill. That's the reason why we're not moving to it. At least that's what I heard earlier. Now there's another reason, but it's absurd. Vote against it and then justify it. But if you're trying to shield the boycotters, that's de facto support of BDS, in my opinion. And I think it's important for us to pass that. And I emphasize again, this wasn't overly controversial 72 hours or 2 weeks ago. Look at the list of people who support this bill last year: the majority leader, the minority leader, the Foreign Relations Committee chairman, the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, the Senate Finance Committee chairman, and the ranking member of the Finance Committee. Democrat and Republican leaders on multiple committees and at the very top of this chamber support this bill. And yet somehow we can't even proceed to debate on this bill. Now you may say, well, wait till the shutdown is over, because that's the argument that's being used now. We shouldn't move to anything until we deal with the shutdown. I don't like the shutdown. I hope it ends tonight or tomorrow morning. But this is not just any other issue. There is a credible argument to be made that there is a time sensitivity to this, because the enemies of Israel aren't sitting around waiting. This could happen at any moment. These are not the kinds of things that build up. Hezbollah's desire to destroy Israel is long-standing. And what they choose to do about it will not wait for the U.S. Senate to deal with the other topics. This is an immediate threat. It is right before us, and it deserves our immediate reaction. And this could rapidly escalate. And I'm not going to take up another 30 minutes to describe all the scenarios in which that can happen, but I'll give you one which is not out of the realm of possible. Now that they know that the U.S. is going to be withdrawing from Syria, the Israelis decide, and I believe rightfully so, that for their own defense, they need to start attacking even more inside of Syria. Those supply lanes that Iran is using, every time they see a truck with rockets on it, we're going to blow up the truck. Every time they see IRGC or Hezbollah militias forming anywhere near their border, we're going to hit them. They're going to step up those attacks now because we're not there anymore. And Iran is going to fill that void. And so they're going to have to step up their attacks. At some point, Iran and or Hezbollah or both are going to react to those stepped up attacks with attacks of their own, at which point Israel is going to respond with even bigger attacks. And then the cycle of escalation begins. And before you know it, very quickly, in this region, we could have a shooting war. Not a war of words, not a vote at the UN, rockets and missiles being fired at one another from Lebanon, from Syria, into Israel, Israel responding back into Syria, Israel responding back into Lebanon. In fact, Israel has said all of Lebanon is on the target list, since now Hezbollah and the current president of Lebanon have created a political alliance. And you've got all these other countries running around, including the Russians now inside of Syria and the Turks up to the north. It's potential that their troops get caught in the firefight, eliciting a response back to Israel. And before you know it, we have a multi-state, multi-party, all-out war in the Middle East. The possibility of that happening is not far-fetched. And I say this to you today with no pleasure. There will be another Israel-Hezbollah war. That's just a matter of time, and the next one will be far deadlier. But it is incumbent upon us to do what we can, and there's things we can't do, and there's things we can. It is incumbent upon us to prolong that and prevent that as long as possible. And one of the things that we can do to help prevent that, or to extend the time before that happens, is to make it very clear to Hezbollah and Iran and everyone else that if you take on Israel, we will support them. We will support them. And that's what this bill is designed to do, not just to send that message, but to put in place that reality. And given the tinderbox that is the Middle East, and given the unpredictability of the various actors involved, particularly those who hate Israel, why would we not move immediately to address something like that? Why are we not capable of voting on something that would probably get 80 votes here and still deal with a government shutdown? Because the last time we had a government shutdown, we were still voting on bills that had nothing to do with a government shutdown. When the other party was in charge, we were doing that. There's no precedent for doing it. I believe that it is possible for us to do both, and that's what we should do. This isn't tax reform or health care reform. This is something that is urgent and immediate and requires our attention because of the unpredictability of foreign events today, because of the unpredictability of this part of the world. And so I know at some point here soon that the leader will bring up for a second time a vote on the motion to proceed. It's not even a vote on the bill. It's a motion to begin debate on this bill. If nothing else is going on around here, and let them continue to meet and have dialogue and talk about how to get us out of the shutdown. I hope we do. I hope that happens. But don't shut down the Senate, particularly on a topic of this importance. Because these events will not wait for us. And it is important for us to act. And please don't go around asking people to stand up to foreign policies of this administration that we don't agree with. When we try to do it, or at least offer a counter or something to diminish its negative impacts, and the response is obstruction. And not just obstruction because of policy, obstruction in order to make a political point, or to avoid a vote that 3 or 4 senators might not want to take. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think when it comes to national security and foreign policy, on those issues, we should try to the extent possible, remove them from the daily grind and back and forth of American politics, because the repercussions are dramatic. That's the one thing that makes national security and foreign policy different from domestic policy. You can always go back and change a bad tax law. You can always go back and change a bad health care law. You can always go back and make changes to a bad banking law. You can't undo history. You can't undo wars once they've started. You can't undo carnage once it's occurred. Foreign policy is often irreversible. And once mistakes are made, you have to do the best you can with the hand you've been dealt. And that's why I hope that on this one we stop playing games and we get on this bill and we pass it, so that even as this debate about the shutdown continues, we make clear to the world and we make clear to her enemies that we stand with Israel. We always have and we always will, across party lines. We may bicker and fight about many things, but when it comes to the support of Israel, we are united in the House and Senate, Republicans, Democrats, and the White House, in support of our strongest ally in the region and one of our strongest allies in the entire world. Mr. President, I yield the floor.